Hit points are one of the stranger stats in Pokemon. While having a larger health pool can allow you to tank hits more easily, if you don't have at least okay defensive stats to back it up, you'll end up far less bulky than your HP stat would imply. It's one of the few stats that really only means something in conjunction with the Pokemon's other stats. So today, we're going to go over some of the highest HP stats in Gen 1, and talk about how that translates into their defensive profile. And starting off at number 10, we have Exeggutor with an HP stat of 95. Now, there are actually quite a few Pokemon that tie with Exeggutor for 95 base HP, namely Slowbro and Clefable, but they were left off this list thanks to having a lower base stat total. Exeggutor is a grass/psychic type with overall solid stats, with an equal attack and HP of 95, a solid if not impressive 85 defense, and a stellar 125 special. The only bad stat it has is its quite poor 55 speed, which, while a weakness, is at least it outspeeds the truly slow Pokemon, and Exeggutor's bulk does compensate for having to go second a lot. Exeggutor's ability to tank hits is somewhat undercut by its typing, which has a grand total of 7 weaknesses, one of them being a 4 times weakness to Bug. However, a lot of those weaknesses didn't either exist in Gen 1 or didn't matter in the generation. Ghost was infamously bugged and didn't deal super effective damage to psychic types, and Dark didn't exist yet. Bug and Poison didn't have any good moves in Gen 1, with a single exception being Jolteon's Pin Missile. So you have to really worry about Flying, Fire, and Ice type attacks having an advantage over your weakness Riddle typing, which is far more manageable. All of this allows Exeggutor to work as a powerful, tanky Pokemon in Gen 1's competitive scene, maintaining a reputation for being a beast in the OU tier in Smog, the most popular tier for competitive. Combining its powerful psychic attack with moves like Sleep Powder, the most consistent way to spread sleep in the game, it can threaten almost any Pokemon in the generation. Sleep is even more broken in Gen 1, so having a Pokemon that can both sleep your opponent and deal consistent damage while being able to tank hits versus a lot of the tier's Pokemon is a great asset to any team. While all of this is great, it's not without its flaws. Certain Pokemon can bully Exeggutor if they get a clean swap thanks to how many weaknesses it does have, and in playthroughs, it's quite the pain to get a hold of. You can only get it in the Safari Zone, which is a huge pain to catch Pokemon in. Still, Exeggutor does a good job of showing off what a good HP stat can do. Exeggutor's defensive stat is only okay, but thanks to its above average HP, it can tank hits a lot better than most other Pokemon, which allows it to be a great Pokemon despite having such a low speed stat, which is usually enough to hold a Pokemon back all on its own. And at number 9, we have Gyarados. This water flying type is tied with Exeggutor at 95 HP. However, it has a much higher base stat total. It has great offensive stats with 125 attack and 100 special, letting it deal massive damage to a ton of different Pokemon. The rest of its stats are just average, with 81 speed and 79 defensive, allowing it to outspeed most and tank hits far better than you may remember. Gyarados is mostly thought of as an offensive Pokemon. The main attraction of using it is its massive power and wide coverage. Still, Gyarados isn't generally considered a tank. Its 4 times weakness to Electric is extremely easy to exploit, and something that you have to keep in mind while using the Pokemon, as even with its above average bulk, it will drop to most decently powerful electric types. Despite this weakness, Gyarados threatens massive damage on a ton of Pokemon, completely outpacing a lot of the gen's common Pokemon. All of this lets Gyarados just barely carve out a niche in the OU tier in competitive, though it is considered an underused Pokemon, the tier right below OU, as it's not quite able to hang out in the OU tier. A large part of this is thanks to its excellent coverage, getting best-in-class moves for a majority of the game's best offensive types. However, Gyarados really shines in playthroughs. It's very easy to get, as Magikarp is easily available both of the old Rod and from the con man outside Mount Moon. You can easily grind the fish up to level 20, and get one of the stronger Pokemon in the game extremely early. It is a bit of a TM hog, but considering the Pokemon is usable all the way into the league, it's a worthwhile investment. Gyarados is a pretty famously strong Pokemon, and while it is famous for its offensive prowess more than anything, it does show that just a bit of investment into defense can pay dividends down the road. And at number 8, we have Muck with an HP stat of 105. It has a nice attack stat of 105 as well, and the rest of its stats are quite bad. 75 defense is only okay, but 65 special is pretty below average, and 50 speed is pitiful for a fully evolved Pokemon. Muck is also a pure poison type, which is pretty awful in Gen 1. Weaknesses to both Ground and Psychic are very exploitable in Gen 1, and you don't even get a Poison Stab that's usable, as you don't have any good poison attacks and won't get the extra 50% damage. Muck's offensive spread is also pretty bad, as it doesn't get many good physical attacks outside of Body Slam to use off of its better physical attack, and instead has to rely on special moves for damage coming off a below average special stat. This wouldn't be too bad except for the fact that Muck doesn't tank hits well enough, and doesn't have any utility moves to threaten an opponent's Pokemon with. Muck does take hits better than the average Pokemon, especially on the physical side, but a high HP stat can't patch up its defensive profile entirely. Muck's low speed and bad damage means it still loses the damage race against most foes. Normally, bulky Pokemon can use a recovery or status moves to leverage their bulk against their opponents, but Muck just doesn't get all that much in the way of utility or recovery. It only gets rest for recovery, which is too easy to exploit, and its best utility moves are Substitute and Acid Armor to try and wall up on the physical side. Of course, any special attacker won't care about this at all. The end result is that Muck just switches in and accomplishes nothing before fainting against almost any Pokemon. Even worse, in playthroughs you obtain it incredibly late, at the Pokemon Mansion, far after you've found multiple other good poison types, especially ones with useful secondary typings. In both competitive and in playthrough, Muck is consistently outclassed in its role. This really goes to show that a high HP stat won't instantly make a Pokemon as tanky as it needs to be to fulfill its role in a game. And at number 7, we have Kangaskhan, a pure normal type with exactly 105 base HP, tying with Muck but beating it in terms of base stat total. This is a pure normal type Pokemon with an overall nice stat spread. It has a good 95 base attack, average defense, and a high speed of 90. The only bad stat Kangaskhan has is its quite low special of 40. On the physical side of things, Kangaskhan is a really strong Pokemon. It can take physical hits fairly well and dish out big damage in return. There's very little in the game that's okay switching into its Body Slam or Earthquakes, and the few Pokemon that can are terrified of the right coverage move. However, it does have a lot of competition, as OU is famously ran by 3 ridiculously strong normal types in Snorlax, Tauros, and Chansey. Kangaskhan does have a different role to these 3 normal types, only really playing similarly to Tauros, but not quite as good. The redundancy of Kangaskhan goes even further, as it's a Safari Zone exclusive Pokemon, which is also where Tauros is found in Gen 1. Essentially, as good as Kangaskhan is, it's hard to ever justify using it over the literal best Pokemon in Gen 1 competitive. That's not even getting into Kangaskhan's crippling low special. Not only does this mean that it can't use a lot of its powerful coverage moves, but strong neutral special types will chunk Kangaskhan for huge damage. Pokemon like Starmie or Alakazam both outspeed and outdamage Kangaskhan thanks to just how bad this stat is, despite the fact that Kangaskhan's HP is so much higher than theirs is. Still, even with all of these flaws, it's really hard to call Kangaskhan a bad Pokemon. It solidly outperforms most of the field. The only real flaw Kangaskhan has is being yet another normal type in a generation, with tons of absurd pure normal types. And at number 6, we have Rhydon, which also has a base HP stat of 105. However, it once again has the higher base stat total between it and Kangaskhan. Its stat spread is also more specialized, with all-around crazy physical stats. It has an astronomical 130 attack and 120 defense, meaning that hitting it on the physical side is essentially a fool's errand. However, to balance this out, it has a terrible 45 special and only 40 speed, so it's not outspeeding anything that's not paralyzed. Rhydon's strengths and weaknesses are pretty obvious. It has 2 separate 4x weaknesses, both to special types as well. Any grass or water type attack is likely to one-hit KO it, however its typing also means it resists normal and is immune to Thunder Wave, letting it switch in to punish Hyper Beams and explosions, as well as attempts to paralyze your team. Combine this with its devastatingly powerful Earthquakes and Rock Slides, and you have a Pokemon that excels in punishing very particular Pokemon, but is easily punished in return. All of this makes Rhydon a huge force in Generation 1 competitive. Pokemon like Zapdos and Jolteon, both great OU Pokemon in their own right, essentially have to switch out if it hits the field. And so Rhydon is able to hold on to some relevance just for being such a strong counter to these types of mons. This use case is also maintained in playthroughs. While it's obtainable late into the game, in the Safari Zone once again, it can pretty easily handle just about any Pokemon without a solid special attack stack to smack it with on your journey. If you just want a rock/ground type, you'll probably go for Golem if you're using trait evolutions, just because it's so easy to get. But Rhydon is the premium for this kind of mon. While it is a bit pigeonholed into one role, it's so good at that one thing that you have to keep it in mind. And at number 5, we have Vaporeon, a pure water type with a base HP stat of 130. It also has a pretty high special stat of 110, but the rest of its stats aren't anywhere near as impressive, as they all fall around 60. Vaporeon's high HP stat translated well into being a bulky water type, capable of easily soaking up almost any special attack. Even powerful, super effective attacks like Jolteon's Thunderbolt have a pretty low chance to 2-hit KO Vaporeon. Not to say that you should just leave it in against a strong Electro type, but this example does do a good job of showing just how good it is at taking special hits. While it doesn't take physical hits anywhere near as well, it's not like it will drop to a single strong physical attack. Its massive HP pool allows it to shrug off all of these kinds of hits and then fire back a powerful Surf or a Blizzard. In a playthrough, you can get Vaporeon as soon as you get the Gift Eevee in Celadon City, and it's quite a good water type for your team. Now, Jolteon is maybe the best all-around evolution for Gen 1, but if you're in the market for a water type, you can't go wrong with Vaporeon. Now, all of these are strong attributes, but Vaporeon does have a few weaknesses. It's slow enough that most sleep-inducing Pokemon can outspeed it and shut it down in competitive. And there are a ton of water types competing for a spot on your team in these games, both competitively and casually. Still, Vaporeon is one of the better bulky water types in the game, a very valuable thing to have on your team, though many would argue it's outpaced by the next spot on this list. And at number 4, we have Lapras, with an HP base stat of 130, but higher stats overall than Vaporeon. This water/ice type sports decent all-around stats with around 80 in attack and defense, a solid 95 special, and a low speed of 60. Lapras is a very powerful Pokemon thanks in part to all around its great bulk. Its ice typing does remove a few key resists, such as to fire, but even with that downside, Lapras still tanks a lot of hits very well. Luckily, it also has a great special attack to back up that great bulk and fire strong blizzards back at your opponent. Even if Blizzard won't do enough damage, you can always use the somewhat inconsistent Sing to put your opponent's Pokemon to sleep. While it does only have 55% accuracy, if it does connect, it's as good as a KO. This is even more powerful in a playthrough, where you can use the opportunity to heal up your whole team while the AI just sits there, not switching to a new Pokemon. Being a bulky water type that also had access to a sleep-inducing move gave Lapras a role in OU for years, only more recently falling off a bit in the tier. Now residing in the UU borderline, meaning it's too good for UU, but isn't quite an OU Pokemon. Now, Lapras does also have one more downside, at least in a playthrough setting. While you get it free as a gift in Slivco, it's only obtained at level 15. Far below what your team would be at that point in the game. So you'll be forced to take a break and grind some levels on it if you want to add it to your team, which most players probably don't want to do. Still, if you do go through with the grinding, your reward is one of the best water types in the game, and before you can obtain a lot of the other contenders for the title. All of this to say that Lapras is a very strong Pokemon, but with a few notable flaws that hold it back from being considered one of the best Pokemon in the generation. And at number 3, we have Wigglytuff. This is a pure normal type with a massive 140 base HP. Unfortunately, all of its other stats are outright bad. It has an only below average attack of 70, but every other stat is dancing around 50. The combination of its astronomical HP stat and its below average defensives leaves Wigglytuff with a very average bulk, which is really bad considering its massive HP is the only standout thing about it. It has no other standout qualities outside of getting access to Sing to sleep your opponent, something that a ton of other Pokemon also have access to. One of those better Pokemon being its twin, Clefable, is just better than it in every way. Not only is Clefable faster and hits harder, but it also takes hits better than Wigglytuff does. They have basically the exact same role, except Clefable just does everything better. Clefable even has access to the better move pool, as it gets access to Light Screen, giving it even more utility. The worst part? Clefable is only a UU Pokemon in Gen 1, not quite able to be a consistent player in the more popular OU tier. Wigglytuff is a poor imitation of a Pokemon that needed a few generations to really come into its own, and in Gen 1, Wigglytuff barely holds on to relevancy in the never used tier, only above the real trash Pokemon populating PU and ZU. 2 tiers designed around containing the absolute worst Pokemon in the game. You even get it around the same time in the game as Jigglypuff and Clefairy both become available once you get to Mount Moon after Brock's Gym. So it's not even useful before you get the Pokemon that outclasses it later in the game. Wigglytuff really shows the pitfalls of dumping a ton of stat points into HP without anything to back it up. While it does have some good coverage attacks and utility moves, it simply takes too much damage from your opponent and is too slow to really be useful. All around, Wigglytuff just has nothing to offer that other Pokemon don't do better. And at number 2, we have Snorlax, a pure normal type with a massive 160 HP. To go along with that massive HP stat is a staggering 110 attack, but it only has a slightly below average 65 defense and special. Snorlax is also a very slow Pokemon with only 30 speed, so basically everything can outspeed the guy. Snorlax is one of the 3 big normal types of OU, which have defined the meta of the generation for years, and its massively bloated HP stat is a big part of that. While it only has slightly better defensive stats than a Wigglytuff, combining them with its colossal HP stat makes it feel far, far tankier than the majority of Pokemon. On top of being able to take hits pretty well, Snorlax can fire back with some extremely powerful attacks. Snorlax just wins 1v1 against an absolute ton of the best Pokemon in the game, at least as long as it has the right moves. This makes Snorlax a bit of a powerhouse, exerting a ton of offensive pressure through its combination of high bulk and strong attacks. It's also a Pokemon you have to encounter in playthroughs, as it blocks your paths in routes 12 and 13, leading it to be an all-star in a lot of playthrough teams. After all, why wouldn't you catch one of the best Pokemon in the game if you're required to deal with it to progress anyway? In many ways, using Snorlax is kind of a no-brainer to use on your team in Gen 1, regardless of what you're doing. However, there is one notable Pokemon with an even more absurd HP stat. And at number 1, we have Chansey, a normal type with a crazy 250 HP stat. It also has a pretty nice 105 special. However, all of its other stats are actually kinda bad. Only 50 speed and a comical 5 in attack and defense gives Chansey an incredibly lopsided stat spread. On one hand, hitting it with special moves is an exercise in futility. Not only does it not take that much damage from them, but it also has a massive HP pool that can easily replenish with Soft Boiled, easily shrugging off basically any special hit. On the other hand, even its frankly absurd HP stat can't make physical hits not hurt. It doesn't instantly fall to a single strong physical attack thanks to just how much HP it has, but its physical bulk does end up being pretty below average overall. This kind of makes Chansey a reverse Rhydon, except way better. Another upside of Chansey in Gen 1 is that it also deals pretty good damage thanks to special only being 1 stat. Not only is Chansey essentially invincible to special teams, it also smacks things just as hard as the likes of Starmie, which is just absurd for such a tanky Pokemon. Chansey is basically an auto shutdown button for any special attacker, which is especially important in Gen 1 thanks to how broken Psychic types are. In Gen 1, the only Pokemon that resist Psychic-type attacks are other Psychic-type Pokemon, meaning Pokemon like Alakazam can just spam Psychic without fear of ever being meaningfully punished. Or at least they would, but because Chansey is such an insane special tank, it can pretty easily switch into these strong special attackers without fear and then force them out. Without Chansey around, Psychic types would be almost impossible to stop in competitive. Unfortunately, Chansey isn't quite as good in a playthrough. It can wall any Pokemon reliant on special attacks, sure, but that doesn't come up quite as often in playthroughs as you might think. It's also found in the constantly frustrating Safari Zone, which is so annoying to catch Pokemon in that many players choose to skip on it. Despite its small hiccup, Chansey is still obviously one of the most broken Pokemon in Gen 1, and its frankly laughable HP stat is a huge part of what makes it so good.